We now have Yolande here with us, I think. Yeah.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
here.
Hi. I don't know why I can't see your picture. So yeah, I'm not going to do a big introduction like I was going to do. I'm just going to say thanks so much to Yolande Strengers for joining us today from Monash University. We're really, really delighted to have you here to give a talk on this topic, as it's, you're just one of the key figures in this intersection of digital and energy. So really, absolutely perfect for this seminar series. So yeah, I'll just hand over to you and we'll get going. Everybody, we may run over a little bit to have some time for questions and discussion. So hopefully many of you can stay with us for a little bit longer this morning. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Yolande. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And again, I'm so sorry to all of you for being late. I won't go into why. It's a complicated technical computer story, which is actually quite on topic for today. But yes, my deepest apologies for stuffing people around and then causing a whole lot of back-end problems with the event system as a consequence. So look, I will try and be brief so we still have a little time for discussion, which means I might just kind of skip over some things, but I have got references throughout the entire presentation, and all this work's now been published. So if you are interested and you want to get into the details, I just encourage you to look up some of the reports or the journal articles and look up the work that way. So you may have already heard about this project, Digital Energy Futures. It's what I've been really focusing on, not so much now, but for the previous 3-4 years, and working with a great team at Monash University on this project. And today I want to sort of talk you through some of the methods that we've been developing to think about futures with people, and also scenario planning that is an interventional mode of planning into the energy sector, which is where this work has been situated. So very much hopefully on topic with the series that you're all interested in and part of at the moment. So I just wanted to kind of take you back to where I got to Digital Energy Futures. For those of you who know my work, early on I became really interested in household pets. Doing ethnography, you often bump into pets in people's homes, and they're so important to people's lives. I'm sure everywhere, but particularly in Australia, we have one of the highest rates of pet ownership anywhere in the world, and cats and dogs in particular are often part of the home. And I became really interested in them because people were starting to leave appliances, particularly air conditioners, on for dogs and cats, and also leaving windows and doors open for them, which obviously has energy implications. And Australia, if you don't know, our peak demand is or has traditionally been primarily driven by residential air conditioning cooling in the residential sector. So that was a big concern when I sort of started to see these new emerging trends around dogs and cats actually being part of air conditioning. And I started to think about, well, is this being taken account of in forecasting and planning in the sector? And of course, at the time, it wasn't, because pretty much forecasts were very technology led and from the perspective of the energy system. So this is an example of a CSIRO, which is our national science agency, a kind of future grid scenario of 4 scenarios for the future that they put forward a number of years ago now. I think it's almost 10 years old, actually, 2014, I believe, when this came out. And so I saw this and I was really quite concerned, because there's really no people here apart from the prosumer, but the prosumer is kind of essentially imagined to do all the things the energy sector wants them to do, as opposed to live their lives in their homes and use energy as a kind of part of that. So there really isn't any everyday life in these scenarios. And there's also no sense of change in everyday life. So no sense that in the future, the way we live now might be different. It might be different. So all of these things kind of came together, and I started thinking about this with some colleagues of mine at RMIT at the time, and we were experimenting with, okay, well, what would a different kind of scenario look like that put these everyday kind of practice trends to the fore? And we came up with this stay-at-home pet scenario, which we published early on. And that was really the beginning of the thinking, the conceptual development behind the Digital Energy Futures project. So I just kind of wanted to give you that little bit of history as to where we got to. But when we were writing that article, you know, we came up with the concept of a social practice imaginary as kind of a central way of, I guess, imagining the future through a lens that foregrounds everyday life and everyday experience. But we didn't really yet have anything to kind of, I guess, put that into practice from a systems perspective. So thinking about how that would become part of forecasting, how that would become a part of scenario planning. And so that led us to the Digital Energy Futures project, where we were asking this, we wanted to flip the question around. So instead of saying, what will the energy system look like in 2050? We asked this question, how will people live in the future? And we looked at 2030 and 2050 in Digital Energy Futures. And then, you know, from that, we were kind of supplementing that with questions like, you know, how will people live in the future with climate change trends that are predicted? How will they live with new emerging digital and energy technologies, not just, you know, what we call consumer energy resources here in Australia, so electric vehicles and solar and batteries and all that kind of stuff, but emerging AI, you know, different types of smart home appliances and automation and all that kind of stuff. And finally, what will that mean for energy forecasting and future demand? So I'll just put this up here to give you a sense of the team. We've had a number of people working with us over the lifespan of the project. So myself and Sarah conceived it and led the project, and then we worked with this fantastic team of research fellows and support staff as well on this project. And our partners are Ausgrid, AusNet and Energy Consumers Australia. So two of those are distributors in Victoria and New South Wales, and the third, Energy Consumers Australia, is kind of a peak body for consumers in Australia. And also, just before I move on, I just want to acknowledge that since we've done that work, there's been an enormous amount of work across the world, really, and particularly from geography, that has focused on similar questions. So we've been following that with a lot of interest, and I'm not going to be kind of making the links today, but in our papers, we certainly cite a lot of the other scenario work and forecasting work that's been happening and being led from the social sciences. So I think we were responding at the time to pretty much a worldwide recognition that we needed to put more kind of human elements into these future visioning exercises that the energy sector relies on so strongly. So look, this slide's probably very familiar to all of you. This is us out there doing ethnography with people, just to kind of give you a sense of that we've been out talking to lots of people as part of the project. But I'll run you through the stages, and I just kind of wanted to get more to the end parts, but it's useful to sort of give you a sense of the evidence base that we built up, because we designed the project really with the first three phases as developing a unique evidence base that was future focused, which we didn't have in Australia at the time. And we're still, you know, it's still in development, I would say. So in terms of forecasting, our partners were relying heavily on historical data, trends that were, you know, trials that were being underway in Australia, and just kind of like very common sort of appliance trends and housing trends that were going on. They didn't have any future focused data at all, and they didn't have any evidence from people themselves about how they see their futures unfolding. So that was our first step, was to kind of build up that evidence base with the first three stages, and also set that against or compare that to how the industry expects the future to look. And I'll go through that in a second, because we looked at a couple of different industries. And then the last three stages were more about opportunities to either intervene in the futures that we saw unfolding, to develop foresights to think about the future, and also to create the scenarios to help with planning and forecasting. So stage one, industry visions, trends and scenarios, is a little bit old now, really. We did this a number of years ago. And as I said, we started with industry trends. And what was unique about this particular piece of work is that we put industry trends from the energy sector together with those coming from the digital technology sectors. So we looked at, as I said before, you know, emerging forms of AI, automation, smart appliances, robotics, you name it, you know, kind of tried to cover as much as we could. And then we put that together with the energy trends into these little scenarios, which you might have seen before. these are scenarios that are visions entirely from the industry. We didn't kind of come up with any of these ideas ourselves. What we did was put them together, and Carrie Dahlgren led this work from our lab. And, you know, really what we wanted to see was how these visions work together, because we were very aware that they're often quite separate. And indeed, when we did the review, we found very little kind of conversation happening between those two kind of areas. The emerging tech trends really had no kind of, they weren't talking to the energy trends at all. So part of what we did here was put those together into some different kind of, well, I guess they're scenarios. We called them comic strips at the time. And then we started to use them with our participants. The little stop system up the top, we were using later reports. So this also became a kind of benchmark against what we found in the later stages of the project when we did the ethnography and the household work. It sort of was like, okay, how do these comic strip visions, how do these visions from the tech sector and the energy sector compare to how households themselves see their futures unfolding? And we had this kind of traffic light system going through our report saying, you know, you guys are way off the mark. Your visions are completely different to what we're finding. Or yeah, we can see there's some correspondence, or yep, this what you think is what we're seeing unfolding in households. So kind of gave a really good little benchmark for industry about whether their visions were matching the reality that we were seeing out in everyday life in people's homes. Then we did a very intensive ethnography with 72 homes across Australia, and we visited them multiple times. There's a documentary from that work. I just thought I had something else in there, but I don't. So yes, we looked at and analysed this material around a series of practice trends which cover different aspects of everyday life, things like cooking and shopping, transport, so driving and moving around, heating and cooling. Yeah, so we sort of divided the analysis up into those practice domains to help us make sense of the emerging trends, and did some kind of deep dive analysis into all of that. As I said, there's a documentary from that one as well. And then we took those trends from the ethnography and we put them into one of our partners' surveys. So Energy Consumers Australia runs this longitudinal behavioural survey, and it had a future-focused element in it for 3 years while our project was running, where we kind of put in what we thought were the most significant findings into this survey, and then got national responses, representative responses. So it was a really great way of kind of testing the findings with a larger sample. And also really important for building confidence with the industry that our findings were robust, were transferable, were not just an isolated incident, but something that they needed to pay attention to in their own forecasting work and their own distribution areas. So it was, I mean, I'm not a survey person generally. It's not something that features a lot in my work, but I'm finding them increasingly important as a mechanism to engage and convince industry. And this project was as much about how to translate social science research into technical, domains of forecasting and demand response as it was about, doing really good social research. So the translational aspects were really important in the design of this project and how we set it all up, even in terms of the kinds of mechanisms that we presented back to industry, like the scenarios and forecasting toolkits that we developed in later stages. Okay, just checking the time. I won't focus on this too much, but we published a report that Larissa Nichols led, who some of you may know, really just kind of pulling out all the opportunities from the qualitative and the ethnographic research that we could see to innovate the field of demand management. So these are very much kind of programs that could be that are led by the kind of everyday life lens, rather than more traditional demand responses like pricing incentives and things like that. So we tried to augment, I guess, the dominant approaches with some other opportunities that we saw emerging, and give that back to industry as a kind of toolkit really about opportunities that we could see for them to support what was already happening in people's homes, but also potentially intervene in trends that may be harmful for planning and for forecasting in the future. and may result in, you know, unaffordable energy bills, for instance, or a lower security of the grid or something like that. Then we sort of really started getting into our future work. So in our design ethnography workshops, this was led by Sarah and also with Hannah Korsmeyer, and we had a kind of a series of workshops across. They ended up being virtual. A lot of this was done during COVID. Yeah, so we ended up doing these workshops across the country. Again, some of the participants were the same, some were different. And we introduced a series of activities in these workshops that were really designed to place people in future situations and also engaging with future technologies that we'd found already from the ethnography were of interest to them, or something that we could see was likely to emerge. So instead of kind of asking them about the future, which we did a little bit in the earlier stages, we tried to place them in the future. And we also tried to do this locally in relation to their own neighbourhoods and their own kind of set of circumstances. So, for instance, we did an EV activity that was very much based around them moving around their own neighbourhood and thinking about where they could charge, where they would charge, what would be convenient for them within the lifestyles and the lives that they already had, and then overlaid with, okay, what if there's this climate change situation? How would you kind of navigate that then? From that work, we developed not only a set of insights around the activities that we ran, but also these foresighting concepts, which we later used to guide our scenarios. And really, I'll just check no, only one slide here. Okay. What we were trying to do with these concepts was think about the values and the expectations that will be important to people in the future, which we've been discussing with them and working with them through the research. And we tried to also contrast that with the assumptions that are being made now by the industry about how people are likely to respond both now and into the future. So resourceful and generous, for instance, was the flip side of the dominant kind of assumption that people value, I can't remember exactly the wording, but it was kind of economic and calculated and rational decision making. So we weren't saying that doesn't exist and people aren't going to act in that way, but we were saying that what will be more important in terms of people's orientation to the future is being resourceful with their energy resources in terms of making the most of their solar assets, rather than just kind of making the most money, but making the most of the asset and being generous with that. So if they could see an opportunity to share it or to give it, or maybe for some compensation still, to another group of people that, say, needed it more than them, or were likely to use it for a kind of community service, like to run a library or to run a community centre or what have you, that was something that they might be more likely to engage in. So there's 12 of these concepts in our report, and Sarah's also written about them in some of her papers. So if you're kind of interested in seeing all those reframing concepts, I encourage you to have a look at that, because it's quite detailed. And they helped us, as I said, help us kind of orient the future in a way that brought in people's kind of what we thought people might find important, I guess, in those future scenarios. So this all led us to the final stages, where I just wanted to kind of focus on a little bit on some remaining time. I'll try and wrap up in 5 or so minutes. So these were our scenarios. We call them scenarios for future living. And these were, I guess, bringing together all the other stages of the research, the evidence that we collect in the early stage, the foresighting concepts and the future kind of work that we've done in the workshops, and also some of the demand management interventions as well. I'm not going to go to the method too much tonight, because today, sorry for you, it is, yeah, it's quite a lot here, and it is all published now. I think I put the references up there. In a lot of it's in ERSS. So Farid Kaviani led a lot of this work for us at Monash. And yeah, I think it's probably just in terms of time-wise better to kind of have a look at that, but I'm happy to also answer questions. But essentially what we started with was another industry analysis of industry scenarios, and we wanted to pull out all the assumptions that were in those, check out how they currently frame the future. So those, like those ones I put up at the beginning of the presentation about the set and forgets consumer, and prosumers thrive, I think was another one. You know, those kinds of scenarios, which have very often quite similar language. There's a whole bunch, I'm sure you're aware of, reports that do that have those kinds of scenarios as their focus. That's what we analysed, particularly with an Australian focus, and we grouped them together in terms of their assumptions, their beliefs, their storylines, what they expected, etc. And then once we sort of pulled them apart, and it sounds very basic, but there was a very intense process around pulling them apart, we then attempted to reconstruct them around the project evidence base. So we didn't start with nothing. We built our scenarios, our new revised scenarios, on revisions of what industry thought was going to happen. We didn't throw out industry predictions, we built on them, and we brought in our kind of everyday life perspective to try and, I guess, add a bit more what we felt was more reality to the situation that was likely to unfold. And at the end, we also had a roadmap for sort of how to either intervene in some of the scenarios which are perhaps less desirable, or support some to move forward, and how to forecast them, which I probably won't have time to go into today. Okay, I'm going to skip over that process. Like I said, you can jump in and have a look at that in our report or our articles written about this. Just the kind of end stage. This is the reconstruction part. So just I guess it kind of summarises what I have been saying about what we brought in to the reconstruction, the foresighting concepts, which was that one I showed you, resourceful and generous, for instance, the workshop foresights, the ethnographic trends, the quantified trends from the survey, and also the mega trends from stage one. So some of the predictions that we saw the digital and energy sectors saying are likely to occur. And we literally rewrote the stories, because scenarios are essentially stories. So that's how we treated them. And we started to rewrite the narratives based on all this evidence to kind of give the scenarios a voice. Just wanted to mention, we also brought in climate science, which for Australia is not looking great in 2030 and 2050. So in our, that's the time periods we set our scenarios in, 2030 and 2050. So you can see, you know, continued increases in temperatures, hotter, more extreme weather days, etc. Not looking good. So we tried to bring in the science as well into our scenarios as we develop them. And these are the 4 scenarios that we rebuilt from the project. So 2 of them are set in 2030, the top 2, and then the bottom 2 are set in 2050. So I'll just briefly run over them, and then perhaps we can go into detail on a couple if we've got time. The top one is essentially in response to the idea that everyone's going to embrace automated technologies to run all of their energy resources in their homes, you know, to manage solar and dispatch energy when it's needed in the grid, and sell it back and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure you're all familiar with these ideas. And we augmented that scenario with the idea that people will also value automation, electronics, appliances, all kinds of tech in their homes to not just serve energy needs, but to create new comforts for themselves and essentially increase their standards of living through technology. So that's why we call this scenario creature comforts. And we found that this had the potential to disrupt load management objectives, because essentially people would be using more energy for more purposes than they had previously. And some of those purposes would be conflicting with the ambitions of the energy sector. So that's kind of the gist of that one. Sharing the load was about the grid becoming, as you can see, becoming more than just an enabler of the market. So it was more about people, again, this kind of resourceful and generous concept coming through here, participating in a decarbonised, reliable and affordable energy system that supports community wellbeing. So people being more interested in programs that enable them to for instance, share energy with others rather than just kind of act as operators or participants in the market. So the bottom two start getting a little bit different. They both respond to an industry scenario around essentially the automation of most energy resources in the home and many other things as well, which is I guess a big ambition for the energy sector, particularly here in Australia, that eventually, they'll have pretty good control over large loads, including, say, EV charging, but also potentially other large appliances as well, and also potentially batteries. So this is a really strong industry narrative. So we split it up into two scenarios that we thought were possible based on our evidence base. The first is called hunkering down. It's where everyday life is increasingly defined by all those automated technologies that the industry expects. But the twist is that people retain control over the automation. And what that means is when there's, say, an extreme weather event or some other event that's likely to disrupt power or create some form of extra need for power, then you have people overriding the automation en masse and creating a new peak, which we call the override peak. So that one caused quite a lot of concern amongst the energy industry, as you can probably imagine, because they hadn't thought of that. So it's, but we very confident that people will not accept full automation, that it was seen as potentially desirable or potentially useful, but they really wanted to be able to retain that control and override where they felt it was necessary. And then the final scenario, the other thing about hunkering down is that the response to extreme weather is very much individual, household driven. So all the tech, all the response is localized to the household. So there's very little kind of community infrastructure or other kind of support mechanisms available, which makes that override peak even more intense. In sunrises and siestas, there's a institutional set of shifts that occur. So for instance, we see school times and work times shifting around the weather. We see society adapting to the changing climate and the energy system. We see much more kind of infrastructural change, more community infrastructure, more community transport, more kind of policy responses at that larger scale. And some of this is developed, some of this is driven by a shortage in lithium batteries and the supply of materials and manufacturing capacity for consumer energy resources, which is one of the things that we found was a possibility in the megatrends reports that we were looking at. So it's sort of, again, you can see how we're putting different things together there for a very different kind of scenario in that particular project. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. So these are the scenarios which I've just explained to you. The only other thing I wanted to mention is we do follow these three families, or these three households really, through each of the scenarios, and we did that to highlight the socio-economic and the place-based inequities that arise under different scenarios. So the first on the left is the Johnsons. It's a single dad and his family, although that shifts generationally as we go from 2030 to 2050. The top household is Jinyi, a migrant to Australia, and she has a robotic cat in one of the scenarios, which changes to a dog, which is a little story behind that I won't go into. And then bottom right is, and Jinyi lives in an apartment, so they all live in different types of housing as well. And then the bottom right is Ruth and her daughter, and they live on a rural property, and as you can see, Ruth's quite elderly. So there's different kind of scenarios there to highlight we couldn't cover everything for sure, but we saw so much diversity and many inequities and future vulnerabilities in our scenarios, and they played out differently for these households as we moved through. So that's how we tried to kind of take that into consideration, and we have little stories for each of these families or these households as they move through the scenarios to kind of highlight those. Just wanted to flag that where we were heading as a research team, we thought this was valuable to kind of give ourselves a vision through the project, which was for an energy system grounded in the everyday lives of the people it serves, which supports desirable, plausible and equitable futures with social science knowledge at its core. So you can see that mission there of kind of flipping around energy scenarios from being technical led and energy led to being having that everyday life kind of changes at the core of them. I won't go into that. Just wanted to mention that we are actually taking this research forward now in a new project called Scenarios for Future Living, which was the name of our last report. And it's a bigger project funded by the Reliable, Affordable and Clean Energy CRC. It's just kicked off in Australia. Expanded range of partners, expanded range of research institutions involved as well, with a larger interdisciplinary team. So we'll actually be working with forecasters from UNSW now, designers from UTS, foresighting experts from UTS as well. So yeah, we're really hoping to expand this body of research. I guess the end of the story from the previous project was that it had I think a really great impact in the Australian sector, but many still were sort of left going, oh, but we don't know what to do with it, which is always the challenge with social science research for the energy sector, I think, is being considered robust enough, being considered plausible and reliable enough that forecasters and people who really rely traditionally on that very hard data feel that they can pay attention to it and do something with it. So it's a work in progress. We're still getting there. We're still doing forecasting with this new project. We will go further than we did the previous one, which was really probably more about testing the methodology of the scenario and the futures thinking and how we get that everyday life perspective into the scenarios. The next step is, okay, well, what can we do with that? How can we embed that further into the energy sector? That is the wrong slide. Sorry, I should be telling you this slide. Sorry, it's almost 9 o'clock here, so I'm a little bit tired. So what's next is this Scenarios for Future Living project, as I mentioned, and there's the partners listed there. I'm going to stop there because I realise some of you probably have a hard stop at, I'm not even sure what time it is there, but it's 9 o'clock here. So I'm going to hand over back to Catherine and we can have a discussion if you've got time to stick around, and we can go through anything that I've missed. So thanks again, and apologies again for being so late.
Yeah, no need to apologize. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Just, such a rich, long-standing kind of range of work that you've talked to us about. So did an incredible job to capture what you have and tell us about what you have in the time that you ended up having. So thank you. Really, really appreciate it. I have loads of questions. We will stay on for, I think, 15 minutes. Is that okay with you, Yolande, if we say to quarter past? Yeah. It's 10 here, so 10 in the morning. And I'm aware some people are having to drop off. They've thanked you and posted things in the chat. But anyone who's able to stay, please do post your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, and Amy and I will field them, and we can have a bit of a discussion. I think I think Adelina has posted a question in the chat already. Don't know if she's also left. Are you still here? Yes, you're still here. Adelina, do you want to ask your question? Or I can read it out for you. I think we can. Yeah. Hi.
Hi there.
There you go.
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Yolanda. This is fantastic work. Thank you so much. Really appreciate to hear that. I think I'm going to try to just read the question really quickly. Otherwise, I might likely waffle. But basically, it seems to be there's this tension between what the industry and energy and digital industry are imagining our future is going to be like, and the kinds of things that we think we will want in the future. And obviously, as you know, they interact with each other and check them. But in a way, the industry, and especially the tech industry, wants us to consume more products and consume more energy. So it's more and more and more. And I was wondering if anywhere along the project, you got a sense that there is a desire to consume less. Is it in any way seen as sexy and desirable that we are going to just use less energy, which in a way we all could use a little bit of that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, I think there are for some people, yes, there's definitely a desire and an intention to use less, but it's very difficult right now, and possibly has been for a long time, I think, because we're constantly being introduced to new stuff, and I think particularly driven by the digital sector, we're constantly being exposed to things that become new needs, which either have direct energy impacts in our homes or, through data centers have enormous impacts. So while, I guess this is the challenge of our time, really, our times, is that we have people who want to have a slower life, who desire, to have less technology, who want to minimize their impact on the planet, but are finding that extremely challenging in the face of new things constantly kind of being put in front of us. I don't know what the answer to that is, unfortunately, but I think it is something that we need to be engaging with more deeply, and other projects that explore these connections between these two sectors, I think, are so critical, because they're often in isolation and not speaking to each other. I think the energy research community is starting to do that more. There's been a lot of work on digitisation over the last, few decades, and it's very much on this community's radar, I know, but there are new technologies kind of coming into our lives all the time. I was just at a robotics conference the other week, and the sustainability lens is very early in its development. It's I want to use a nicer word than basic, but that unfortunately is the word that's coming to mind. And many are just completely unaware even of the impact of their own products, and that sector is their success is defined by user engagements and by uptake of their products, by interactions, number of interactions, right? So it's actually their whole market and design philosophy or paradigm is, how do we get people to use this thing more often and for a long period of time? I guess a long period of time potentially is good from a sustainability perspective, but yeah, the two, it's almost like there's these two completely different logics that are in tension with each other. And I would say the technology, digitization, AI, tech, whatever logic is definitely winning at the moment in terms of capturing people's attention, even if they do desire to disconnect and to have a stronger impact in terms of reducing their environmental impact.
I'll just read out a question from the chat. Sorry, I was talking on mute. So we have a question which is really about the future ethnography methodology, and I guess it's kind of related to a question I had about how the methodology was received by your kind of industry partners. You talked a bit about that kind of issue of the perceived reliability of the evidence, or how they can, use this kind of evidence. So I just wondered if you could speak a bit more about that in answer to, I think I'm going to go Keisha, but I'm probably pronouncing that completely incorrectly, so apologies.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. I would say there's two parts to the answer there. One is the actual scientific relevance or its robustness, and I'd say to that, I think it's as far as I can see, the best, the only, one of the most useful ways of accessing something that doesn't exist yet, because that is such a tricky area to access. And I think, asking people questions about the future, you often just end up reproducing the same answers from the present or the past, or you get answers that are based on science fiction and, things that already exist in the imaginary or the public domain. Whereas future ethnography allows you to access something that doesn't yet exist yet. I'm not aware of, there are other, I think actually there's some good design methods that allow you to do that too, like design fiction and, which is, I don't know. I see Abby's in the audience. Maybe she can tell us if that's an ethnography method or not. But so I would say it's a fantastic sort of really set of methods to help us access the future. But then I think there's another question, is how is it perceived? And for the energy sector, which is traditionally very conservative, engineering-led, quant data kind of sector, it's a bit of a hard sell actually. And they're not necessarily going to be convinced by you as they will see it. This is the way you might, and what you might hear, going out and talking to 10 people or 20 people or whatever, and coming back and telling us what they think. Like, that's sometimes how that kind of research is perceived, which is, I know, very insulting, but that's the way some people see it. So my approach to that is, rather than convince them that the 10 or 20 people is really valuable, which I've tried in the past and not got very far with, is to augment the future ethnography with other methods that they do respect and, value in a way that they will have confidence in that data. So that's why we have the surveys. That's why we have forecasters working with us. And so if you can get friendly engineers or economists in your tent with you that are already on board, and they run with the results and can show how it can have value, and you can build confidence that way, that's another approach. Or you can take your results, put them into a survey, quantify them in ways that the industry kind of, again, respects or understands, and go with that. So there's different techniques, I suppose, to making the research, or giving the industry confidence in the research, which is really what I think they're looking for. But you can't just do the survey, because you wouldn't know what to ask, and this is really critical. If you just go out and design a survey without really understanding what's already happening, and also particularly about what future trends look like they might be coming, then it's going to be very difficult to access any new knowledge, I think, just going out with a straight survey. So the futures ethnography or other futures methods are so essential to kind of get you to that place of then going into the next more convincing set of methods. Yeah.
Great, thanks so much. We've got another question from Douglas Booker. I don't know if you want to ask it, Douglas, or I'm happy to say it. It might be quicker if I just ask it. I'm particularly interested in energy in the home, and a lot of my research is looking at how energy changes disalign or align with efforts for broader concepts of healthy homes, so indoor air quality, etc. And he was wondering if this was coming up much either in the imaginaries of industry or in the imaginaries of people.
I'm not quite, so a lot of my, sorry, I'm just reading that again.
I can add some context around
yes,
that. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for the presentation. It's really interesting. A lot of my work is looking at, for example, energy retrofit to alleviate things like fuel poverty and obviously carbon at the household level. I'm a lecturer in indoor air, so it's perhaps not surprising that I'm interested in what happens when you seal up a building, is that it can make things like indoor air quality worse. So I was wondering whether those sort of conversations on how energy aligns with sort of broader conceptualizations of a healthy and happy home is being seen by industry and people. Is that something that they're thinking about, or is this very much just a carbon perspective?
Well, I mean, they're definitely thinking about it now after this project, because have you seen the healthy indoor air paper, Douglas, the article that we wrote? I think it's just came out earlier this year. I assume that's where this question's coming from, maybe. But anyway, yeah, look, this was a key finding from our project, was that the concept of comfort or air quality is changing in people's homes, in Australia at least. And people are no longer just thinking about how do we access, comfort, heat, hot and cold environments, but how do we access healthy, safe and comfortable air? And that's a significant departure for Australians. And it also has potentially significant energy implications, because what it means for us is that if you're trying to, say, purify an indoor environment, it means you're sealing up the home, whereas traditionally Australians used to kind of ventilate and have windows and doors open, and only use that air conditioning or the cooling when they really needed it. So sealing up the homes, particularly during bushfire seasons, or when there's a pandemic, or when there's some other kind of air quality concern like asthma or allergies around. If we kind of think of the environment, our indoor environment, as now being potentially sealed in the future, then that could totally change how we use all of our climate systems and air technologies. So when we sort of explained that to the energy sector at first, well, first they were very dismissive, I'll say, because they were like, well, air purifiers don't use very much energy, so why should we care about them? That's very kind of, instrumental kind of perspective. And then we said, well, you should care about them because what I just said just before, right? So the way people are using air conditioning now could potentially really shift because purification is getting embedded into air conditioning, which means that this could be an all-in-one system in 10, 20 years' time. We could see mechanical air quality, air conditioning in homes as a kind of climate controlled system, which we don't really use in that way here in Australia yet, becoming the norm, and that could totally change your forecasts. So that definitely has got some attention. I think they still don't know what to do with that in a kind of practical forecasting sense, like what data to kind of put into their actual models around that, because again, it's still so speculative. But yeah, I think it's a really important shift and one that yeah, that it's sort of getting onto the radar, at least for some companies, and if not, I'm sure will be soon, because there's a lot of changes happening in that regard in Australia at the moment. Yeah, and we did just write a paper about that too, if anyone's interested. Shah just mentioned, I can't remember what it's called. Sorry,
It's,
just got back from.
Douglas has very helpfully posted it in the chat.
Oh, great.
They're healthy, safe and comfortable emerging indoor air practices in Australian households. Yeah, so you can link to it. So I'm going to have to draw the meeting to a close, even though I have loads of more questions and I would have liked to talk to you for much longer. You've had loads of really lovely comments in the chat as well, so do take a look at that afterwards. Yolande, it was a really, really fantastic talk. Yeah, just such interesting and exciting work, and yeah, I just really hope that yeah, well, it's great that you're continuing it basically, and that this is going to having the impact that it should be having within the industry. So yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I will let you go. I know it's late at night there and your first day back, so a very long day for your first day back. Thank you so much again for coming and doing the talk. Yeah, we really, really appreciate it, and it will be made available as a recording on the Energy Geographies web pages for anybody that would like to view it again, which I'm sure many will. And yeah, I'll let everybody know once that is up there and available to view. Okay, really good to see you, and thanks so much again. I'll let you go.
Thanks, everyone.